is Darius Sivan, who is the editor-in-chief of New Solutions. Darius is an occupational health practitioner with about 30 years of experience and has been the New Solutions editor-in-chief since January of 2022. So Darius, if you wanted to give a couple of quick remarks.
Hello, as editor-in-chief, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the first ever New Solutions Voices webinar. Excuse me. Voices is a non-peer-reviewed section of our print and online journal. It reflects our commitment to lifting up the voices of workers, community members, and grassroots activists who are struggling to improve working and living conditions and environmental and social and economic conditions. We are very pleased that Swati Rayasam came up with the idea of having Voices webinars and has worked so hard to make the first one a reality. I am very grateful to Janice Martell for creating the McIntyre Powder Project to honor and advocate for her father and others subjected to the inexcusable treatment that you are about to hear about. I'm grateful to Janice and Dr. T. Gadati for writing and submitting 2 excellent articles to New Solution, and grateful for all the work that Janice has done to make this webinar happen. As EIC, I'm grateful to both Janice and Swati for involving me very little in the nuts and bolts of the webinar, allowing Mason and myself, with sage advice from Craig Slayton, to concentrate on publishing issues of the journal. I'm grateful to Mason for doing tech today and Corey Dosti for doing captioning. Today you will hear from workers who are subjected by their employers without their consent to untested medical treatments as a condition of their employment. While changing clothes for each shift, they were forced to inhale finely ground aluminum dust known as McIntyre powder. The powder was blown into the changing rooms with compressed air, and workers were instructed to inhale deeply. It was based on a then unproven theory that it would prevent silicosis, which has now been disproven. Recent research confirms that McIntyre powder has caused Parkinson's disease and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and ongoing research is investigating the links to sarcoidosis and cardiovascular disease. The McIntyre powder aluminum inhalation program was developed, distributed, promoted, and controlled by the Northern Ontario mining industry, but its use spread to more than 200 work sites globally, inflicting the treatment on tens of thousands of miners and factory workers between 1943 and 1979. Most people are unaware that this ever happened. It is just over a year since New Solutions published the first of 2 articles by Martell and Gadati about the McIntyre powder program. The first one was called Trading One Risk for Another, and the second one was the Voices piece. It was called Breathe Deep Boys. Dr. Gadati is an internationally recognized expert in occupational and environmental medicine, and Janice Martell is the daughter of affected miner Jim Hobbs. Janice founded the McIntyre Powder Project in 2015 as an effort to determine whether her father's Parkinson's was related to aluminum inhalation. It documents health issues and exposed workers by means of a voluntary registry, and its goal is to help all affected workers. To date, there are 600 mine workers registered with the project, and you will hear some of their stories today. With that, I would like to welcome Janice officially to provide an introduction before we leave the comfort of our lives on the surface to enter the underground world of the miners who are graciously joining us today.
Thank you so much, Darius, for that welcome and that background. Thank you, Swati, for getting us all together, and for Mason and Corey for being here to provide the tech support and the technical help. The mine workers who are here today, and I always call them the McIntyre Powder Project miners because they worked in mines, but actually there was a lot of jobs done in the mines, electrician, mechanic, millwrights, different things like that. And you'll hear from some of them today. But together I call them the miners because they all work together. Just before we go to I have an introductory PowerPoint just to orientate people. Certainly I won't be giving a ton of information because that information is in those 2 articles that were graciously published by New Solutions, a journal of environmental and occupational health policy. But I wanted to just orientate some people to, what McIntyre powder is and that sort of thing before we speak and turn it over to the miners, because I want you to hear from their voices. People are probably sick of hearing me talk about this because I've been on my soapbox for a while, but I want you to hear from them. So these are canisters of McIntyre powder, just to give you an idea of how little they are, but they did a whole lot of damage. They were patented by mining officials up in Porcupine Mine, McIntyre Porcupine Mine up in Schumacher. So if you want to start the slideshow, Swati, I can carry on from there.
Swati, I need permission to share slide.
I can share it from my screen if you prefer.
Yeah, Janice, that works okay if that works for you, if you can share it. Otherwise, I can do it.
I have to have it open to do it, right?
Yeah, but I have it up also if you need it. Here, I'll go. Janice?
Yep. Thank you. Sorry. So if you go to the next slide, please. Or can I? Okay, I can. Can everybody see that? Okay, sorry, just give me 1 second. I think I'm looking at my screen and not yours. Thank you. Can we go back 1 slide? Thank you. This is McIntyre powder and what it looks like inside of the canisters. That fine powder is very much like toner fluid. If anyone's ever worked in an office, that dry toner fluid that you use for photocopiers, it gets right into your skin. That photo was from the Timmins Museum. There was a film canister I was researching there, opened it up, and that's what happened is it came out and I quickly tried to clean up and it got right into my skin. So I can imagine only what that does to your lungs. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, that gentleman is putting in a canister of McIntyre powder into this apparatus that would puncture it. It's attached to compressed air lines, and that would be blown into the mine dry, which is the change room that miners would use to change before they go underground every shift. And for my dad, he was actually, there was a different separate chamber that they were exposed to for this McIntyre powder. Next slide, please. Even though McIntyre powder was developed in Northern Ontario, its use spread worldwide. There were 55 companies in the US, at least, in 14 different US states. If you go to my McIntyre Powder Project website under resources, you can see which companies used it. Companies like Kohler that produced, toilets and bathtubs and stuff like that used heavy silica. They used this with their workers as well. You see on the right-hand side, the Buffalo Pottery Incorporated. These are 2 workers inhaling aluminum through a tube. And on the left-hand side, sorry, in North Kalgoorlie mine in Australia, it was used in a lot of Australian mines as well, and it was blown into the change room there. Next slide, please. I got into this and because of my dad, who's the fisherman you see in the middle. He wasn't just a miner. There's many things that Dad did. This is Jim Hobbs. He went down into the mines in Sudbury, in the copper and nickel mines here in Sudbury, starting in '59, and then worked somewhere else for a few years, and then went to Crane Hill, which is a nickel copper mine in Sudbury, and then in 1978. When the uranium mines were booming in Elliott Lake, he switched to Elliott Lake, and that was his first experience with aluminum dust. And I got into this because my dad developed Parkinson's. About 10 years after the mines closed, he started having symptoms, and he was diagnosed in 2001. And we had no history of Parkinson's in the family. He was one of 11 children, and nobody ended up with Parkinson's. His parents didn't end up with Parkinson's, and we wondered what was the cause of it. And in 2011, I found out that he had been exposed to McIntyre powder because he hadn't talked about it during the time that he was mining, which is not atypical. Most mine workers really don't talk about their day. And that's why we're here today. And that's why today is so special. So I, with his blessing, started this McIntyre Powder Project voluntary registry to find out if other workers like him were exposed and if they had Parkinson's or other health issues. And of the miners that I have registered now, 64 of them have Parkinson's. So it's over 10% of my voluntary registry have Parkinson's. 106 have COPD, lots of silicosis, lung cancer, sarcoidosis, cardiovascular disease, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, pancreatic cancer, blood cancer, prostate cancer, digestive cancers. There's a whole lot of health issues in these miners. Not all of them caused by McIntyre powder, but there's a lot of mining environment things, asbestos that they're exposed to, silica dust, diesel exhaust, you know, class 1 carcinogens, the same grouping, group 1 carcinogens, the same as smoking. And the United Steelworkers back in 2015 got involved, as well as the Occupational Health Clinics for Ontario Workers, OCOW, and we held intake clinics in Sudbury and Timmins for workers who had been exposed to McIntyre powder to register. And since then, we've been doing that. I've been doing it over the phone with workers, and still am. And we have close to 600 registered as well with us. And we're investigating the causes, if there's any links in the clinical literature, and doing further research between McIntyre powder exposures, other mining exposures, and health. Again, we've confirmed COPD and Parkinson's, specifically to McIntyre powder, but there's a whole lot of other concerns, particularly because of the particulate size of McIntyre powder. It was extremely finely ground. You'll see, you might, if you work in occupational health and safety, you may hear about PM 2.5, which is the small particle size. So fine and in some cases ultra fine or nanoparticles. McIntyre powder was comprised entirely of PM 2.5 or less. And the particle size, apart from the aluminum, has health issues. And we're going to be hearing more about that in the very near future, especially with respect to cardiovascular disease. So OCOW is continuing to work with these workers and trying to investigate this cluster. The USW is continuing to help with certainly promoting around to try and make people aware of this. Next slide, please. Because I was a miner's daughter and I knew nothing about this, my dad's first exposure, I was 11 years old, and I was 44 years old when I first heard about McIntyre powder. They don't talk about this a lot. Dad rarely talked about work. You knew that something was wrong sometimes when somebody had got killed in the mines and he'd come home and he was upset. But he just didn't tell us about his working conditions at all. And it was really important to me since I started this. I've had many of the mine workers who registered are deceased now. I quote, I think 40 some of them in the article, and 8 of them have died since they registered, since I got those quotes from them. So the first article on trading one was for another by my co-author T. Gadotti and myself, really focused on the history of McIntyre powder and wove that into my dad's story and how this affected him and one family and the McIntyre powder project. But the second article that we're really kind of focused on today, the Breathe Deep Boys, really focuses on what I've learned from these miners over the last 8 years, really. I started talking to them in 2014 before I went public with it in 2015. And there's a lot of very hard-hitting quotes in there about their work experiences, not just with McIntyre powder, which was horrific in and of itself. But there was 3 sort of themes that came out of this. And one was, you know, their experiences with McIntyre powder as opposed to the official narrative, the official story that was being told by the mining executives through the McIntyre Research Foundation, talking about McIntyre powder and it being this miracle cure to prevent silicosis, and that the miners, what they say is very different from that. The second theme is really centered around workers being sent back to work on light duty, even though they were quite seriously injured at times, or being paid to stay at home to bury compensation claims and to suppress compensation claims, and being given these internal reward systems where you would get you know, you would get these gilded plates and these jackets and stuff saying that you had so many hours, you know, without a lost time accident. But really, a lot of these workers were going to work with very ill or very injured, and they just wouldn't lose the time off of work because they would go into the, you know, the health and safety room or the first aid room or and play cards or whatever, and to cover these statistics, and being given doctor's notes in by mine doctors, as they would call them, whether they officially worked for the mine or not, to go back to work. And the third thing that really came out of this is that even though they were getting mandatory chest x-rays from the mines, and there'd be mine inspections and stuff, and if you worked in uranium mines, you'd have dosimeter badges to measure your radiation, that really didn't that really didn't help protect them, and they had a lot of questions about, you know, they never received any feedback or you know, what are the results of my chest x-rays. So those kinds of are the three sort of themes that we're going to talk about today. If you go to the next slide, we'll talk about the first one, and then we'll break off, talk to the miners, and come back to the next one. So this is, again, the mining industry narrative versus the lived experience of the workers. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's Fifth Estate Investigative Journalism Program, it would be similar to 60 Minutes in the US or PBS Frontline. And they interviewed the president of the McIntyre Research Foundation, W.B. Dix, William Bradley Dix, back in 1979. They did a show called Powder Keg. And this is one of his quotes from there is, we don't force a man to take it. But if you look the quotes from the actual miners, you know, if you got caught leaving the room, you get a 2-day suspension. And back then we had to do whatever they said in order to keep our job. And they herded us in there and closed the door, and you had no choice. You were in there, you're locked in, or in some cases you wouldn't be locked in, but you were stuck in there and told from your supervisors, you need to breathe this in. Breathe deep, boys, is what they were told. This is your protectant. So I'd like to throw it over to some of the mine workers who are here to talk about their experiences underground. But before I do, there is one gentleman, he's a miner from Timmins. His name is Jerry Rosen, and he didn't think he'd be able to make it today. He wasn't sure with different appointments, but he sent me a story about his experience with McIntyre powder, and he asked me to read that to you. So here goes. Mr. Villeneuve was the dry man, and his job was to spray the dry with the McIntyre powder early in the morning before the miners came in the dry to change into their work clothes. I was curious of what was the blue sparkle dust was that covered the entire dry and all the work clothes. Mr. Villeneuve explained that he was directed to spray the McIntyre powder in the dry prior to the workers' arrival, and the purpose of the McIntyre powder was for the miners to inhale the McIntyre powder to cover their lungs to prevent silicosis, or better known as black lung. The miners did not feel good and knew that there was something wrong with breathing in the McIntyre powder. I would shake the dust off my clothes every day. Soon the miners started complaining to their union reps, and with time, the McIntyre powder was banned. So that's from Jerry Rosen. So if other miners want to take your turns, I'll let you speak in your own words.
Yes, Jen?
My name is John Kagan. I worked at the 3 gold mines in the Timmins region, the Honor, the McIntyre, and the Buffalo Anchorite. I remember when I used to come into the dry in the morning, I was probably one of the first ones there because I was always early at work. I used to get into dry at the McIntyre, and there was a gray haze all over the dry. And that lasted, like, you know, that I can remember at least half an hour before we were bringing that all the time we were in the dry. So the dry at the McIntyre was closed, and at the Honor was closed those days. So they used to transfer us by bus from the McIntyre mine to the Honor property. And that's where we went down underground and worked into our stopes. But we were breathing that for sure half an hour every morning before we went to work. Some people were asking me, was it happening after work? No, it wasn't happening after work. It was always in the morning when we were changing in the dry before we went to to the shaft, take the cage down and went to our stope area. And that was in 1977. So I was there for a little over 2 years, I think it was. So I was breathing that stuff for over 2 years every morning. So that's my story. Oh, I remember there was the one time also when I did get hurt at the Honor. I was off for a month and I was told just to stay home, they'd pay me. So I'm not sure if there was ever a claim put into the WSIB. I doubt it, because some of the older guys that were there used to tell me, no, they're not going to put a claim. They're just going to tell you to stay home and we'll pay you.
Thanks so much, John. Roger, I see your hands up. If you wanted to talk about your experience, this is what you were told.
Yeah, I'd just like to give you like a daily encounter of a miner going into work, if you don't mind, in just a few minutes. So I worked at Algo Mines in Elliott Lake for Quirk 1, Quirk 2. And most of the shutdown mines that were closed at that particular time, where we had to go in and just do maintenance on them. My job there was an apprentice electrician working towards my first class papers, which took about 5 years, 4 to 5 years. So my employment there was from November the 12th, 1975 to September the 19th, 1980. Like I say, I worked at various mines throughout my 5 years. So my first exposure to the McIntyre powder was at Quirk 2, where Janet's dad worked at. Okay. So just a little scenario, that's what we did first thing in the morning. You come in the morning, get out of your car, you grab your lunch pail, boom, you go through the gatehouse, get into the dry. It's always a rush to get in there. Everybody's rushing, getting around. Get out of your clean clothes, get over to the dirty dry. From the dirty dry, you picked up all your work clothes. You picked up your boots, your hard hat, your belt. From there on upstairs, where you picked up your lamp. And from there, you went and seen your shifter, which is your boss. And he gave you your duties for the day, where you would log in, because if you're going underground, you have to log in and you log out. So they know when you're going to do the blast that everybody's up from underground. So once you got all your work orders for the day, or if the boss had to have a little chat with you, or whatever, you worked it out. You took walk around the counter. You did your first aid thing. You did your pick up your bits or whatever, if you're a miner or whatever. Now you're walking down a corridor. There was double doors. This is where I got my exposure to the McIntyre powder. Went through a set of double doors, you heading towards the head frame, where the cage is, where the shaft is. There, the doors were closed. There was a guy sitting there. Sit down, boys. You're going to sit down here. It was a bench on both sides. And it was quite lengthy. It was probably 25 feet, 30 feet in length. At this particular time, everybody came in. We sat down. As everybody was getting their work orders, once that room was full of workers, the guy closed the doors. Okay, boys, here we go. McIntyre powder is going to be exposed to you. They put it into the air system. We're all sitting in there. Everybody got the dust. Everybody. I'm talking about pipe fitters, miners, drillers, blasters, anybody that worked underground. Myself as being an electrician, mechanics, we were all exposed to it at that particular time. The room was filled with dust, just a black powder, like a graph. I call it a graphite because it was, like Janet was saying, it would get into your pores of your skin, on your hands, on your clothes. You'd be sitting there with your partner, and if you took your coveralls or your t-shirt and you went to cover up to breathe, a cleaner air, they come by and he said, no, you can't do that. Sit back and breathe in that air. So that's what we had to do. If you didn't do it, you were picked up and brought out, and they would deal with you at that particular time. You were either brought to your shift boss or somebody, and they'd deal with you. After many times, all the guys just sat in there and said, okay, we got a job to do. Let's go do our job. It was a treatment for silicosis. The treatment was, give us some McIntyre powder. They were having a lot of cases of silicosis up in Elliott Lake in the uranium mines. This was supposed to be the cure for all. Turns out it doesn't. We didn't know that. We weren't explained it. We had no say in the matter whatsoever. Here it is, boys. Breathe it in. Once you get 10 minutes or whatever it was, you're done for the day. Okay. Open the doors, everybody out. You go to the head frame, you sit there and you wait for your cage. In the meantime, another group of people came in. They got the same thing. And it's in the process of this, our guys were going underground, and that's where we went underground. We did our job. And it was supposed to be, here it is, there's your treatment. Okay, now go to work. The trouble is, when you were young, like I was at that time, hey, you do what you're told. You want to make a wage, here you go, get underground. There's where you're going to make a fair dollar. You know what I mean? So that's what we did. We just did it. I tried sneaking around many times through the hoist room and through the tunnels and all that, and they'd catch you back there. And if you didn't go, you got called in, and you were penalized for it. So all I'm saying is they exposed that stuff to us with us not knowing what it was. And the trouble with that is later on in life, this is where we find out the problems that arise from all this stuff. So that's my first experience with the McIntyre powder. Quirk 1, Elliott Lake for Rio Algo mines. So I hope that has some highlight with the rest of you miners and that. I think this was where I worked for Rio Algo. Janice's dad worked at the same mine that I did. We didn't know. We just did as we were told in order to go to work. So that's my first exposure to McIntyre powder. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. And Hugh, I see you have your hand up.
Hello there. My name is Hugh Carlson. I live in Red Lake, Ontario. I've lived here for 75 years. I started mining in Red Lake in 1964. I lied to get underground. I was only 17 when I started. I worked at the Campbell Red Lake gold mine. I worked at the Dickinson gold mine, and I worked at the Cochiner Wellens gold mine. And I think I worked mostly summers. Winters. My family was in the resort business, and so I had the summers in fresh air, which probably led me to better health than I might have had I been breathing aluminum dust for all those years every day. I grew up in a household where my father's best friend was a person who had worked at the Howie mine in the 30s, and he had had silicosis, and he had had one lung removed. And in my community, there was a variety of people who suffered from silicosis from before the days of water drilling. There was a lot of dry dust and so we were led to believe that the aluminum powder was the solution to the silicosis problem. And I guess that was the information they had at the time. And all three of the mines made sure we got our daily dosage of the McIntyre powder. They had various ways of doing it, but the end result was they all accomplished their objective of us breathing aluminum dust. And as they say, many miners in Red Lake, with a generation before me, were suffering from silicosis. So we were comforted, I guess, at the time. We didn't know any better. This was going to be the solution to the silicosis problem. And as we find today, there wasn't quite that simple. Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hugh. We'll go to Alan next because he's got his hand raised.
Okay, thank you. Well, you guys are sure bringing back memories. Man, oh man, I worked at, my name's Alan Moyle, I'm in Timmins, and I worked at the Dome underground from 71 to 81 as a drift miner. I remember starting and I think it was Hugh or John who had mentioned the dry, and you'd come up from underground, your clothes are wet with sweat and water and those types of things. And you saw one of the photos with a picture of a dry, there's a rope where you bring your clothes right up to the top so that they dry out. When you come in for the next shift, you bring it down, the combination of water, sweat, and aluminum dust, your clothes stood up. Like my coveralls would stand up, I wouldn't have to pull them on, I'd just jump into them. And I really didn't think too much about it, but I did notice there were times there, if I had a cold or had phlegm and I'd spit, it would be black. I couldn't question it because it was, as was said, it was part of the job. If you didn't like it, you just didn't have to work there anymore. So I think most of us just accepted it. It wasn't until I saw Janice's work that I started having feelings about it. You know, this stuff was said to be good for us and those types of things, but I'm learning now that we were used. We're, you know, take the stuff, get the ore out for us, and when you're gone, we'll have our stuff and we won't worry about you anymore. Someone had said that we were treated as guinea pigs, but even guinea pigs are followed up on. But how much have we been followed up on until Janice has started doing her stuff? So anyways, it's something I've really thought about. There's, you know, when I first met Janice at a local conference center when she was doing her presentation, at the end of the day, I left feeling violated, not by Janice, but just understanding what had happened to the miners for all those years, you know, and there was almost like the only other time I felt that way was after a break-in into my home. It's just that feeling of betrayal or loss, or I don't know, but it's really something that you know, is on our minds now, and we've seen through the work of Janice and her colleagues that it wasn't right. It wasn't the right thing to do, and we shouldn't have been forced to do it. Anyhow, that's as much as I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. And Gilles, I was wondering if you wanted to speak on this as well.
Sure, I'll try my best. I'm not a very good speaker, but yes, hi everyone. My name is Gilles Major. I'm a 73-year-old man, and I'm on 7 liters of oxygen daily, 24/7. My lungs are virtually destroyed, and I'm pretty well terminal for my lifespan. I can only walk about 10 feet, and I have to stop and catch my breath. I worked at Denison Mines in Elliott Lake as a uranium mine for over 22 years as a heavy-duty mechanic underground, and 4 years as an underground supervisor, but went back to heavy-duty mechanic because I didn't really like the way management was directing supervisors. I worked at David Bell also in Marathon, Ontario. It's a mine, gold mine, and I worked there for 22 years till my retirement in 2014. I spent a lot of time in the hospital since then. In my years at Denison, I remember being exposed to a lot of toxic blast smoke and dust, and quite a few times, and of course, the aluminum dust administered daily. They would say, take a deep breath, they would say. We had no choice but to breathe this dust or go home. I was exposed to aluminum dust daily from 1968 to 1979. And also I was going to say that from my work underground, I remember going home after working on air drills with no protection, of course, in those days. It wasn't really available to us to get ear protection and all that. So of course I need hearing aids now. I'm now wearing hearing aids. I remember one time driving up the ramp, and it was so smoky that I had to feel my way up the ramp, up to the fresh air, using an old Klein truck. So I was exposed to a lot of smoky engines as a mechanic, which also attributed to my lung problems. So I'll leave it at that for now. So thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing, Gilles. And Janice, I think we'll move to the next section. That works.
Sure. The next thing that really came out apart from just McIntyre powder, was really how badly workers were getting injured, how frequent the injuries were, and the fact that there was a real strong program in place to reward safety and to reward not reporting injuries, really. Workers were paid to stay home when they were really sick to avoid compensation claims. Don't get me wrong, there was lots of compensation claims made, but there were also a lot of ones that weren't made, that were suppressed. You know, and that made it hard for the miners years later when, you know, they started having, you know, major issues from a previous back injury that was never documented fully. So it was a huge issue, and you could see in here there was a Rewalgome Stanley Mine Safety Award for the hours worked. That's a jacket. I just interviewed that gentleman who is not doing very well right now. I just interviewed him in August, doing some documentary filming of these miners to film for history what they went through, and he pulled out that jacket to show me. Bill Garrow from Elliott Lake provided me with a couple of these other pictures that you see, the golden plates, and you can see silver plates of silver colored plates of how many hours worked without a lost time injury. There would be community breakfast, different things like that. Physicians would send workers back to work in mining communities, even though by rights they should have been off work. Not every physician, there was good physicians everywhere, but it was well known, and particularly one mining community said you could not get a physician to write down silicosis, that you had silicosis in that particular mining community. And I heard that over and over again from different miners. We were all talking together and, oh, you say this and we'll just share the same story. I was individually talking to workers and getting these stories. And I know this from my own experience with Dad. I have this is his Rewalgome first aid record, and I was going through it yesterday. And these are the kinds of injuries that workers had, and he had claims for some of these. In 1979, he was crushed between two ore cars. He was coupling cars to the mucking machine when the cars came together, and he was squished with his shoulders like this, and he had shoulder and neck problems for the rest of his life. This isn't a very good picture for blurriness or whatever, but that's Dad at home. On the other side of, he was sitting in front of a door, and on the other side of the door was a weight. It was to do traction on his neck as ordered by the doctors at that time, because he had those problems for the rest of his life, really, especially if he had to put his hands over his head, any kind of overhead work like that. He got hit by a 150-pound piece of loose that took a chunk out of his face. He had to have some reconstructive surgery on there. And on one occasion, I remember it was a month after my first wedding, in 1987, he had an 1,800 pounds, almost 1 ton piece of loose. Loose is when you're blasting rock and stuff. Some of that rock is loose, and you take these scaling bars and you just kind of pick away at them and try and get the loose pieces down. But anyone who works underground can tell you there's pieces of rock falling on you. Most people don't walk. I don't walk into my office ever thinking that the roof is going to collapse on my head. And this is what they dealt with every day. Every day there was that risk and danger. And that 1,800-pound piece of loose, his partner was able to jump out of the way. It hit like I think a scaling rod or rebar first. So he jumped. He didn't quite get out unscathed. His leg was caught, but there was a little bit of a crevice in the rock, or his leg would have been crushed. And when he went to the doctor at Emerge, it was wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we'll send you back on light duty, won't we, Jim? And my dad told him where to go and how to get there, because he was laid up in bed. We had a little bell for him to ring when he needed help. He couldn't walk, and he lived an hour away from the mines. We lived in Massey, Ontario, and traveled up to Elliott Lake. And his official record, he did a compensation claim from that, and his official record would show that he was not going to be sent for light duty, but they wanted him to go. So I know firsthand that this wasn't a surprise to me when workers were talking about it. But one particular worker who wasn't able to be here today and wanted to, Bill, this is one of the quotes, and you'll read this in Breathe Deep voice. I got injured one time. I caught my neck on a piece of screen and got whiplash. Next day, I woke up sore and I went to the hospital because I wanted an x-ray to get checked. When I went to work, I got sent to human resources, and the human resources manager said to me, "You shouldn't have done that. You should have come to work. You had no right to go to the doctor." The human resources guy, that was his job, to make sure you come to work. It didn't matter if you were injured. So if any of the mine workers would like to chime in there and talk about your experiences, I know that they're varied, but please go ahead. Jim, you didn't talk the last time. If you can unmute yourself, Jim. I just wanted, you had given me this quote when we spoke, because we were talking about the fact that the workers were so invested in this prize scheme. If you had so many hours that got to this level, you would get this kind of a prize. And if you had so many hours more, you would get, and they got the leather jackets from Denison. That was a big thing. And those men, they wore those with pride for years, and you'd still see them. You still see them now, 40 years later. You'll see those odd jackets and stuff, but they would get so much pressure from the other workers. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the other workers you didn't want to report anything because you did not want to be the guy to blow the safety record. And this is the quote that Jim had given me before. You'd bury your injuries. You'd bury anything. It wasn't about the pain you suffered. It was about the pain you were going to suffer if you made a claim. If you said a word about anything, you were the bad guy. Go ahead,
So
Jim.
true. Absolutely, Miss Janice, absolutely. Having the pleasure of working with your dad for a few years on my crew, and you little warrior you, and I think he'd be so proud of you. But honestly, everything I've heard so far is dead on the money. Roger, by the way, I went to law school with Roger, and comically he described, I actually felt like there's nothing I could add to that. It's exactly true. There's not one word I've heard since this started that is out of line. It's so cut and dried to us that went through it. It was so, you just do that. You just shut up. And yeah, you go to work hurt. You're working wounded on a daily basis. It doesn't change. You're always getting banged around because you're the softest thing down there. Again, I started in 1974. October 28th of 74, and exactly, you guys just described my whole, I was sitting here in nostalgia, like the other gentleman said. Oh my God, it's so real now. Like, you don't think about it later in life. Yeah, you do occasionally. You run into one of your old mining buddies, when there's not very many of us left. But it's sort of comical how that was just so right on the money. It literally drove me back to 1974 sitting here. I mean, again, worked with your dad, just love the man. Actually think his daughter is a warrior. There's no cheating this, okay? And I'm really glad to hear you bringing it out, because honestly speaking, that is exactly what happened to us. And the whole safety thing for money they encouraged you to come to work, whether you had a broken leg or not. They don't care. It was all about the safety record. It had nothing to do with your pain or your suffering. It's simply about their safety record. And yeah, I've gotten, oh my God, they probably about every 2 years gave us a leather jacket. Sort of I don't know whether you'd want to call it a bonus for being, working wounded. But they made such a big deal out of it. And yeah, from our perspective at the time, it did feel like a bonus, like a gift for being, working wounded. That's what it was. But I will never, just like you said, I will never forget the taste of aluminum in my mouth every morning. And you'd cough out gray, try not to be gross here, gray cough up. And you'd be underground doing this, and you could taste the aluminum. And to this day, now that we've reinitiated it into my memory, I can taste it as we speak. That pure aluminum taste. It's hard to describe when you're breathing it inside, and it's cough and hack. And they're all pretty much dead on the money. They told you, you do not get to go out of this little room. Roger described it so well that it scared me because he did. I've known Roger since I was in grade 1. Point of this is the whole little tunnel thing with the doors closed behind you and sit down on the bench. I mean, that was, you didn't do anything else. That's how you did it. You had to go through that just to get to work. So again, I don't know that I can add anything. Roger didn't. He just described it so bad that I felt like I was there again. Thank you, Roger. Nice to see you again, sir.
Thank you, Jim.
Anyway, I can only add that I don't know how it'll ever work out in the end. I mean, is there a penalty to pay? People have already paid the penalty, and most of them, like your dad, perished. And we, the survivors of this, still don't know what is going to happen to our, you know, I'm reasonably well functioning at 66 years old, and I quit about 12 years ago. And honestly speaking, there were worse places. The gentleman from Red Lake Mine just described again the whole thing. After Rio Algom shut down, I did a couple of years in Red Lake and a couple of years in the Arctic Circle and a couple of years in Sudbury. And I found it dirtier, but not as, what do you call it? We did have a fairly good go here, except for this ridiculous powder we had to inhale. And you did not get to say, no, I don't want it. There was no choice. So again, just furthering the point that we did not get a choice. It was one of those, you're going through that room, Roger, and that room there, and you're going in them doors and you're going to sit down. When they're happy with you, they open the other doors and out you go. Meanwhile, you're tasting aluminum and coughing it up all day underground. And, oh, I'm just mortified at what they did. And yet at the time, it didn't seem bad. It seemed like they were trying to keep you, personally, the miner, from getting silicosis. So you kind of accepted it, how shall I put it, without any qualms. You simply just did what they said because you didn't have a choice anyway. So you just go in and sit down and suck it in. And I sympathize with you for saying that you could smell it in his lunch pail, because every kid that I have has said the same thing. Dad, it used to smell like hell. I'm like, well, yeah, it came from there. Anyway, my dear, I'm so proud of you. Honestly, I really am. You showed a lot of us older fellows that thought that was just nothing was going to ever happen about it, that something can happen. Now, again, we don't have an outcome yet, or nobody really knows how to quantify whether being 66 makes you start to lose memory, or is it because of the McIntyre powder, or is it a genetic deficiency? Who the hell knows how this all balances out in the end? But I know, like Roger said, we went through this and we're still alive, so I don't know how else to look at it. Anyway, it's my first Zoom call, and I'm so proud that I actually caveman Corvetted my way through at least most of it as we speak. And a lot of that goes to thank you so much, Janice. It's great fun. I'm starting to realize that there is a caveman that can drive a Corvette.
Thank you.
Oh, you're a little warrior, and I just think it's marvelous. I could see your dad smiling. Honest to God, I could.
Oh, thank you so much, Jim. That was so great. And what a very first Zoom event to have. So thank you for letting us be that.
Yeah.
John, I see your hands up.
Yes, I'm sure I can speak for my other fellow miners. When we were working in the mines, like, we used to talk amongst each other and say, we're just a number. Like,
Yeah.
we said that for many, many years. Like, we're just, to them, we're just a number. We don't mean anything, really. And that's the way they really treated us when you come down and think about it. Like Jim said, he worked up in the Arctic Circle. So did I. I don't know if he worked at the same mine as I did. I worked at Nanisivit for Strathcona Mineral Services in 1975, 76, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I could relate to Alan Moyle, like from Timmins. I'm sure he knows Leon B. He passed away a few years ago. He worked at the Dome forever. So when you think back, the mining community is a very small community, and a lot of the miners, like in Timmins, a lot of us know each other.
And you moved here, the salt mine was beautiful.
Yeah, like, it's a small community and a lot of miners know each other. They all know which mine they work in, and we all went through this McIntyre dust in the 70s. And the results of it, like I'm sure some of us have gotten it. Like, you know, I've had open heart surgery and whatever. Is it really that from dealing with that? I don't know.
You'll be 69 this year.
Yeah, I'll be 69 this year, so far so good, I guess. That's all what I have to say.
Thanks so much, John. Alan?
Thank you. Yeah, John, you hit a nerve there when you mentioned people who die, because we know people who have died. I remember telling Janice about a partner of mine who recently passed away, and it's just awful to see. In terms of health, I don't think I mentioned this before, and I don't know if it's related to the McIntyre powder, but I've been through 2 really rough rounds of chemo for leukemia. The cause, I don't know, but I do have a back injury that I suffered underground, and it still bothers me today, but I've learned to work with it. But I remember what had happened. I was working in a double header, and it was a muck out, drill off and blast, and it was a little production. You got to get your round out every day. And I hurt myself on the Copco, or a mucking machine, when it kind of went off the track and pinned me up against the wall. And my back was hurting, but I just tried to shrug it off. Once you muck around, and you got to put track in. And I remember I was picking out a hole to put in a tie, like for the rails, and I collapsed. And they had to bring me up to surface. And my shift boss wasn't very happy that I was hurt. And he said, well, I'll get some rest and come back tomorrow. I came back. I did get to work the next day, but I went underground, and I stayed at the station. Like, I didn't go into the drift. I couldn't walk. And then they had a captain come and speak to me and said, look, you gotta, we need you. You gotta get this work done. And I said, I can't. I just can't do it. And I said, fire me if you want. I can't do it. So they put me on light duty. They gave me a little can of white paint and a paintbrush, and I was to walk around the drifts, marking the numbers of the drifts. I don't know if that was in the type of mining that you guys were in, but every drift, like 1672, 1400, and those types of things. And I did that for about a week, and I think I might have written 10 numbers because I couldn't walk. Then they accepted it, and they didn't want it to be a compensable injury where you'd have to call the compensation board. But the compensation board was brought in, and out of a bad thing, good things happened, because they believed me. Like, they'd sent me to Downsview. There was a hospital, I don't know what it's called now, but it was a workers' compensation rehabilitation hospital. And the doctors there had no doubt about that I had an injury to my spinal cord, my sciatic nerve. You get that pain down the back of down your butt cheek and down to your heel. So after about a year after the accident, the compensation board put me through school. They paid for my college education, and I ended up with a rewarding career. So it was a bad thing. But with this experience, my experience, I was fortunate, because I know some of my buddies who've been hurt really got the dirty end of the stick from the compensation board. But I turned out okay. So anyways, that's my story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. That is really, that's really incredible. I'm just gonna move on, or actually, I see Roger actually has his hand up. Sorry. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something about this compensation cases. Being an apprentice, like, we worked at different places, through the mine, underground, in the mill, all through the infrastructure for Rio Algo mines. So I got to see a lot of places where a lot of people didn't see, you know what I mean? Little cubby holes and the likes of that. So as an apprentice, when I was learning, one of my trades was to get up in the morning, you get your orders. Okay, you got to go do lighting. So which meant you had to go around through the whole mine, whether it be in the head frame or the shops or the dries or whatever, and repair the lights, get the lights up and running. So a lot of the times I would go into the dries to get the lights, because a lot of the fluorescent lights would burn out. And what I used to do is go down into the basement of the dry, which is the lower portion of the dirty dry and the clean dry. And there'd be guys down there. That's where they'd hoard these guys down in there. These guys that were broken fingers, got a squash in the foot or caught in between the rail cars, pinned in between the cars, cuts, bruises, strains. They hit him down there. So what they did is they say, okay, if you can go sweep the dry, go sweep the dry. If you can do something, just do it. You know, clean the dry or whatever you can do. If you can't go down into the bottom of the dry, a lot of these guys could hardly make it down into the basement part. And I'd go down in there to repair the lights and I'd see these guys. Some of them were laying on cots. Some of them were on chairs, playing cards, the whole bit. A lot of them broken fingers, sprains. They didn't send them home. A lot of them actually even got taxied from Elliott Lake into the mine site and was put there. And they punched in, because if you punched in, you weren't considered a case. And the thing is, there was a lot of the older guys, the old guys that I got to know through my dad and the likes of that. And a lot of these old guys were down in there with silicosis. And I mentioned it before to Janice about being at a station or being underground or whatever. A lot of these guys would all sit there and hover, just like you were saying, Alan, about, you know, your camaraderie, shoot stories and that. And we'd sit on our lunch pails. We'd literally sit on our lunch pails and we'd shoot the bull. And a lot of these old guys with silicosis, they were already full of silicosis. Their lungs were bad. They were constantly spitting, hacking. And I would sit at the station when I was working underground and be sitting on my lunch pail, and I'd be talking to one of the old guys that I knew or got to know or whatever. And he'd be there and he'd cough it up and look. Okay, the silicosis dirt was there, the black, but there was also blood in there. Blood from your lungs, blood from your throat, where these guys were infected. If you know, if you got a sore throat from a cold or whatever, you know how raw that taste is. Well, that's what these guys live with daily, plus the stuff that's in their lungs. Breathe in, boys. It's going to coat your lungs and fill you. It doesn't do that. These guys have been affected with these here lungs way back in the day. Like you talk about, Alan, about being in the stopes, in the headings. And I went in there too to extend blasting lines, and I seen these guys and coughing and spitting, and oh my God. Robita, you're down in there too. I haven't seen you in years. You got no hair now. I don't know what you did with your hair, buddy, but anyways, it's glad to see. I'm glad to see you're still around. These things, it's so hard to look back at. Back then, I was young, okay, and I was very fortunate that my dad had experienced a lot of this, and my dad had experience with a lot of the people I seen through the time that I spent my 5 years there. One of the deals my dad did, he was also an electrician there, and one of the deals that my dad and I had planned is we had an apprenticeship program with Rialgo Mines to become in the trades. So you just had to go do an aptitude test and that, and you were, if you could pass your aptitude test, you could choose a trade that you wanted. Jill's like, I know you're from Denison, and I think they had the same thing there. There's a few tradespeople that I know there too that are in the mechanical that are from Spanish area that I grew up in. These people also breathe the heavy diesel fumes from the trackless mining. The trackless mining is a totally different mining than track mining. Totally different. More machinery, more fumes, more diesel, more contaminants in the air. But the deal that I got with my dad, I want to explain it to you. And I talked to Janet about it today, was my dad says, okay, you go in. So I ended up putting a 1 year in doing odd ends and that stuff like this here. Then I got into the apprenticeship program in electrical. In that course of getting in there, my dad says to me, he says, here's the deal we're making. And I said, what's that, Dad? The deal is you're going to get your ticket here, and then you're going to get the hell out of here. I want you out. And on all those years that I put in, the 5 years that I put in, I've seen so many people with cancer in their face, cancer throughout their body. And you know what? That's what made me say, Roger, you got to get the hell out of here. And I was very fortunate with my wife here, Dorothy. She sucked me to come into Sudbury, to live in Sudbury. But in that course, hey, 5 years, I've seen a lot of people go down. And when my paper came in that day, my dad held it up at the door and he says, come here, you're going to open this up. And this is your marks from your trade test. And thank God I got my trade test. So the deal was, if you pass, you go in the next morning and you see the shift electrician, which was there was a fellow by the name of Fred Petersons, and you tell him you give him 2 weeks, and then you get the hell out of there after 2 weeks and don't come back. I often go back to Elliott Lake to look at some of those old mine sites that are there. There's nothing there anymore but a stainless steel pipe coming out of the ground where the head frame was and a big chunk of concrete. And you know what? When I go there, I see those, I still see the head frame. I still see this dry, and I see the old guys that are gone in my mind. They're not there. These guys died before their time. That's the whole thing about this whole thing. Guys died before their time, and it buggered up their families and everything. So I hope, and I hope this gets across to a lot of people. And I just got to give Grant, like Robert, I said, so much Janet has done to this here to get this program up and running, because a lot of people out there have no ideas as to what sorrow was brought to families all over. Like, I have a book, it's that thick, about Elliott Lake and all the people that have surpassed in through the mines and that. I don't think there was a need for that kind of thing. And I hope, like, I just retired a year and a half ago, but I just hope that a lot of the mines in the future will abide by a lot of this stuff that we're saying today, because it's just terrible what they did to us.
Yeah.
Anyways, thank you very much. And Janet, 2 thumbs up, kid. You're doing great.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that, Roger. I'm going to pop over to our last section. We have about 20 minutes left, so I want to be mindful of all your time. But here you go, Janice.
I want to say thanks for the people who are thanking me, but I also want to say, when Dad got Parkinson's, Parkinson's is a unforgiving disease, and you feel extremely helpless. My mom was his primary caregiver. It took a lot out of her. It took a lot out of our family. And I really needed to not be helpless. And starting this project was a way of not being helpless and trying to get that answer. And nothing would have happened. You give me a lot of credit, but nothing would have happened if you guys hadn't stood up. And I know it's hard for you. I know that your culture is to not talk about these things, but you stood up, and I will stand up for you all the time. And OCAL coming on board, the USW coming on board, all of you deserve, I think every one of you deserve compensation for the fact that you were exposed to this. Secondly, we pursued an apology from the Ontario Legislative Assembly, which is the provincial government and all of the elected members. That didn't happen when we asked for that on the International Day of Mourning for Workers on April 28th. It's supposed to happen at some point this session. I'm very lucky that I live in Sudbury. I have 2 local members of provincial parliament, Jamie West and Franz Jelena, who are actually listening to this webinar en route back from Toronto to Sudbury. And they brought this in because they recognize what a human rights violation this was. And I certainly hope, as people are hearing the stories of these workers today, that they will recognize why they need an apology, and that will happen. So I hope that people here will support that. The last sort of section that we want to go over, and I realize that there's a lot of questions and answers, but it's hard to cut off these guys. They don't talk very often, and their stories are very hard hitting. Was just with the medical screening and regulatory oversight. There was a real lack of access to medical screening records. Here's one of the quotes from Breathe Deep Boys. As an underground miner, we were forced to have a chest x-ray every year, which changed to once every 2 years. And if this was not done by a certain date, you could not go to work. I asked the attendant when I would get the results, and she informed me that if there was a problem, they would let the mine know, who in turn would let my doctor know, and he would call me. This is the kind of thing that we're worried about. Hugh Carlson, who's on this call, that is him in the middle. That is the mug shots that were taken of all of the mine workers. There's a little passport called a miner certificate. Rogers has his with him. He can hold it up to the camera as well. But that number and letters was from your chest x-rays, your miner's chest x-rays, and it was a little passport that you could use to go underground to say that your lungs were okay. But the health and safety conditions there, you can see that there's a worker on the left-hand side of your screen standing over an open barrel of yellow cake, which is processed uranium. It says poison right on it. there was no respirators in those days allowed, and you wonder why so many of these workers are saying all my friends that I had in the mines are dead. You know, there was changes in the mines routines in advance of quote unquote surprise mine inspections. Guy said they always knew. They would shut down more dangerous areas of the mine. You know, the water that was lying around would be cleaned up. It wasn't good. So if any of the mine workers want to spend maybe the next 5 minutes or so just chiming in on that if you have anything to say, but we want to leave at least, you know, a few minutes at the end for some questions. I see that there's quite a few questions in the Q&A as well.
Yeah, and I also wanted to invite Hugh, since we saw your beautiful mugshot on the slide deck just there, if you wanted to say anything, because I know you haven't shared since the beginning.
Am I on?
Yep.
Yeah, so there was a picture of me. I was a good looking guy back in 1964, still am, of course. But you know, what I don't remember, I remember that we had our x-rays taken on mine property, and it was at Campbell Mine, and it was in the rec center. And I can't recall who the doctor worked for, whether he worked for the workman's compensation or whether he worked for the company. But we were never given the results, or at least I was never given any results. And I assumed that if there was something bad, they would let us know, but there was no communication. We just went in every 2 years, at that time every year, to have it at the chest x-ray.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. And John, I see your hand is up.
Yes, just want to say, my father was a gold miner all his life also. He worked in quite a few gold mines in the Timmins area. And he passed away of chronic lung disease, but the compensation board would never admit to it while he was living. He was only diagnosed with it after he passed away.
And he was 69.
And he was only 69 years old. So that's what we have to deal with the compensation board. Like they're inhuman. Like when you think about it, you need a lawyer to deal with these people. And even then.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Jill, I also see that you raised your hand. Roger, if you don't mind, I'll go to Jill.
Okay, hi. I can see that in the panel, some of the workers are much better speakers than I am. So it was fun hearing you guys, and it was bringing back a lot of memories. And to Janice, she was showing the slides to that golden platter that was given to workers for their records and safety records. I still have one of those platters in my house as a token of remembrance. But I do remember going to work and having injury and being sort of almost disciplined for having the injury and for causing the mine to lose their records. For the x-rays, even when I applied for my WSIB about 8 months ago with the help of Janice, they were requesting me to supply them with records of chest x-ray. And I told them, well, we never got any records from chest x-ray as personal. They would always tell us if there was something wrong, well, we'll let you know. But half the time, people were half dead before they found out anything. Yeah, so okay, I'll leave it at that because I'm not a very good speaker, so I have lots in mind, but not very well at explaining myself. So thank you very much.
You're an excellent speaker.
Yeah, you're an excellent speaker.
Thank you.
Roger?
Just wanted to show everybody, this is the mine records booklet that they give us. And it gives you your date of employment on the back here, and it gives you a little bit, it's just like a little, I don't know, chunk of paper, that's all. And inside here, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a photograph of me when I was young and had hair too. Hey, Robitaille, you old bugger. Anyways, these are the x-rays here that they recorded. I only had 2, but I think I had 3 because you got one on day of employment when they went through your, when you did a medical, and then I got 2 others. but they're like only a year apart from the 5 years that I was there.
And there's no results.
And no results, no nothing. So we have no idea. I mean, the doctors would just say, okay, there it is. Go ahead. Where you go buy. Okay, sign the paper. And you go to first aid. They say, oh, no, you're good. But nothing, no record, no, nothing. I got nothing to say what happened to me. So that's just the way they did things back then. I don't know if it was the doctor was paid by the company or what the score was. I can't say. Anyways, don't report any accidents because you're not going to get anything from it. That's all I'm saying. Just put the Band-Aid on and see you later.
Yeah.
Anyways, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Roger. Janice?
Just one of the most egregious examples that I had from talking to a worker was he said he went in and asked his doctor what the chest x-ray showed. The doctor opened his folder, took a look at it and said, you need to quit smoking. And the guy said, I don't smoke. Everything's fine then. Go away. That was what he was told. Basically, close the file. Oh, we can't blame it on smoking. Oh, you're fine then. So yeah, so this isn't when I wrote these with my co-author, who I'd like to give a chance to speak as well. You know, I didn't put in one-offs. I put in representative quotes from workers. I was hearing this over and over and over again. So T, who really mentored me through this and has a huge background in occupational medicine, and I just want to give you a minute to, if you want to chime in on anything, and then we can move on to questions and answers.
Well, thanks, Janet, and let me say that as embarrassing as it must have been for you, the kudos that are coming your ways and the appreciation is richly justified and I think deeply personal. First, I just want to say that cigarette smoking addiction is a terrible thing. It hooks an individual and stays with most people for life. But it has also been a great excuse, an exit, if you will, or an off ramp for compensation boards and insurance, and for miners and employers and so forth, to escape responsibility for the for that part of occupational lung disease that is truly associated with the silica exposure. And putting forward an untested, unjustified so-called treatment, and not even bothering to check and see if it's effective, was really evading the problem. It really wasn't solving the problem. And of course, one point that is important here is that that has nothing to do specifically with Parkinson's disease, which is the aluminum factor involved here. So the degree of lung disease, the silica exposure, the deleterious effects of cigarette smoking, and so forth, don't replace the risk that was imposed by the aluminum powder for Parkinson's disease and other neurological effects. So what's going on here are several different effects occurring at the same time. Neglect on many levels, ethical problems on many levels, not the least of which is refusal to recognize genuine occupational injury and to defer fitness to work and rehabilitation. And this still goes on. In fact, south of the border, we have an abundance of data demonstrating that it is still going on, that injured workers are diverted away from medical care and recognition under OSHA guidelines of recognition for occupational disease, because they want to keep it off the books. And this is one reason why fatality rates, which can't be concealed so easily, are still what they've been for a while, but non-fatal injuries plummeted a few years ago. Why? Because they aren't being reported. That's the basic reason. So you may think that this is historical, or somebody watching this may think that it's historical. It is still very much going on. elements of it are still very much going on. And the idea that there's a quick fix by blasting powder down people's throats, or by saying, well, it's not silicosis, it's smoking, and we're not going to look at it any further because we don't want to see what we're going to find in a particular case. This is still very much with us.
Yeah. Thank you so much, T. And I just wanted to also, before kicking to Darius, there was somebody who put a comment in the Q&A actually that I think really addresses this. So Sean Stadden said, I wish I could say the WSIB employer attitudes have changed in regards to light duty, but as one of the worker WSIB representatives for the steelworkers, the same games are being played in our minds today. So just wanted to bring that around. And Darius?
T, I wanted to ask you whether you have any sense of why anybody came up with this theory, why anybody believed it, and also why employers whom economists assure us are rational actors would actually spend money on an unproven treatment. Much of what goes on in safety and health, simply hiding injuries, blaming it on smoking, is sufficiently straightforward that you understand it as the companies protecting themselves. But a lot of what's going on here is bizarre. Do you have any sense of why?
Well, I think part of it is that the idea that science has all the solutions, and the idea that all we have to do is research a quick fix, and we don't have to do anything hard like reducing dust levels in the mines. The laboratories that developed the aluminum prophylaxis or aluminum treatment, and that developed the McIntyre powder were reputable laboratories at that time. The one that looked at aluminum prophylaxis was actually famous for uncovering a lot of the serious health implications of silica exposure and silicosis. It actually originally got its start with tuberculosis research, and it was considered the North American gold standard in terms of research on silicosis, tuberculosis, and other forms of occupational lung disease, which tended to go together. In fact, back at those days, they weren't separated out the same way that they were here. Clearly, they were all kind of one lump of minor lung diseases. So I think that there's that the appeal to authority, because if it came from the Trudeau laboratories, it had to be right. The fact that it was cheap. So it was very appealing to the companies as opposed to solving the fundamental problem, which was dust exposure. And because nobody was looking to see if it worked, nobody could disprove that it wasn't working. So why would they even look? Because obviously there were no problems, because no problems were being reported, because no problems were being looked for. So it was essentially an ideal management situation of evading accountability.
Yeah, that's perfect. I also wanted, because it's a Voices webinar, there are a few comments in the chat or in the Q&A. I just wanted to make sure I read out loud for folks who shared, and thank you for sharing. So Ron Ha, I'm sorry if I said your last name incorrectly, says, not a question, but I too breathed this powder from 1976 to 1979 at Quirk Mine in Elliott Lake. I'm okay, but I did have blood cancer in 2019. But my father, Peter, died at age 56 with cancer and COPD. I spent years watching my father spit black into the snow when ice fishing. He died a horrible death. I too would like to compliment Janice on her efforts. Dorothy Wigmore says, these stories are so familiar to someone who lived in Sudbury several times in the early 1970s and early 90s and has maintained friendships there ever since. It's where I first learned about the diesel hazards from Colin Lambert, the USW Local 6500 Health and Safety Chair in the early to mid 70s. and other mining hazards, including the bonus system, which effectively killed a friend in a rock burst. Thank you so much for telling them, for demanding justice, and for speaking truth to power. And the last one also, Dorothy asks, were there similar early reports about the effects of McIntyre powder that were kept from workers and from their unions? So if anybody has the answer to that.
Janice has the actual historical record, but because people weren't looking for it and had no data, there weren't these early reports. That anything would have been strictly anecdotal at that time. So I'm not aware, including from examples of cases outside of Ontario where that was. You have to understand that at the time that this was taken, people had great faith in medicine. They thought that the system was actually looking out for them. They didn't realize that it had become corrupt, and that the system did not recognize its own limitations. So it was there wasn't much of an incentive. There wasn't the data, and there wasn't the awareness to do such reports. I will say one thing, and that's that the way that that this finally developed, with WSIB actually commissioning a good study after several studies that really fell far short of the mark, was that they were interested in a scientific issue, and that is whether aluminum caused Alzheimer's disease. And somebody got the bright idea that if they studied miners who had been treated with aluminum, maybe they would be able to see a cause of Alzheimer's disease. That didn't happen, and the Alzheimer's disease was not obviously elevated. Although if you look back at the record, there are hints that things weren't entirely right. But they were looking for the wrong thing. They were looking for Alzheimer's instead of Parkinson's.
Right.
They didn't design the study to be robust, in other words.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question kind of from Myrna, that's a part of the point on the government and regulatory agencies and the lack of action from their end. What was the union doing when workers were threatened by their workplaces not to report injury and illness? If any of the folks who are workers on the call, if you have any thoughts, or anybody else. John?
In Timmins, we had our union was the Steelworkers Union, and it wasn't a very strong union. So whenever anything happened, we hardly heard anything about it. The Steelworkers Union was never, like in my days, we're never a really strong union. So whenever there was an accident underground, I don't think anybody really spoke up.
Back in the 70s.
That I can remember anyways. Maybe Alan can speak to that, but
In the 80s and 90s.
like, in the 70s, like early 80s, the unions weren't very strong. Like it's almost as if they were in bed with the mining company in those days.
Thanks, John. Roger, and then Alan.
The only thing I can think of is our unions back then weren't really looking out for health and stuff like that. They were more for our wages. Okay. They were more for fighting for our wages at that time, because everybody wanted the money. Everybody wanted the money. And as far as being sick, it was kind of left out to left wing. I think it was more in regards to our wages back then. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Alan, anything else?
Well, yeah, when I got hurt, I was a union steward. But this type of matter, as someone had just said, was not at the forefront. It's about let's get better wages and those types of things. And like I said before, for years and years and years, it was just accepted. You want the job, you have to take it. So
Yeah,
that's what I have to say.
Janice?
I know based on the 1979 powder keg episode of the CBC Fifth Estate, that the union in Timmins had fought to get the aluminum out, And they were told that, okay, by management, we'll take it out, but if any of these workers get silicosis, the union has to pay for them. So that they took that up, it took it off the table. So it's not that they weren't trying to fight that at the table. They were just had some dirty tricks coming back at them from that experience or from seeing that. And Jill had his hand up as well.
Yeah, Jill. Oh,
Hi. Yeah, okay. I would just like to say hats off to the union. I know things were slow in happening, but it was really hard to get this health safety done to the mining industry, to the mines. But the unions did work hard for the workers, and I tip my hat to them, because I think all in all, we the unions gained a lot in getting us better ventilation on the ground. You know, the first years I worked on the ground, I would go to surface to my house, and my nose was just black with soot. And this is a daily thing. I had to go home every day with soot in my nose. It was just horrible. Those conditions improved a lot through the work of the unions. So yes, they weren't perfect, and they could have worked harder maybe, but a lot of it was accomplished by them that would not have been accomplished if they weren't present. Okay, thank you.
thank you, Jill. T?
Could I just make a really short comment? And that is that the people you see today in front of you were at the tail end of the group that went through all this. So the in addition to being to their age and their experience in the mines, they are survivors in a literal as well as a figurative sense. The miners who went before them had a very different situation, in fact, one in which the mining ventilation was as bad as it ever was early on. And I say that because of the automation of the mines created more dust than manual drilling and digging. So it got worse before it got better. And the depression happened just before the McIntyre powder became widely used. So people didn't have much choice. And once it got established, it's very hard to remove something like that.
Yeah, thank you, T, for that. And then Janice, you have been rapid fire answering people's Q&As. I didn't know if you wanted to just kind of run through them. I also know folks that we're about 5 minutes over, so I want to make sure we wrap up as soon as we can. But Janice?
Yeah, I'm trying my best to answer some of the questions. I don't have all of the answers. There's one, what tool was used and how to find out the development of exposure limit OEL for McIntyre powder. I know that Andrew Zarnke, in his article of the physical and chemical characteristics of McIntyre powder, if you look up Andrew Zarnke, Z-A-R-N-K-E, he talks about the STEL, when you have a high intensity exposure, because this is the McIntyre powder exposure was unique and will never be again, never was before this. Nobody was in the world has ever been exposed to finely ground aluminum like this. People get exposed to aluminum in different ways, but this was a whole bunch of it coming at you all at once in an overwhelming amount, overwhelmed your lungs' capacity to be able to just, get things out as you normally would. And I think it was 5 times the exposure, the absolute exposure limit for an acute exposure. It was a crazy amount, and it's horrendous that this ever happened, and it's completely unforgivable that they didn't follow up with you. There are researchers in the world who could learn so much from following up what happened to these workers for Parkinson's disease, for ALS, for different cardiovascular diseases. What happens when you have this much of a fine particulate matter, an ultrafine particulate matter, on a daily basis given to workers over months and years? You weren't followed up on, and that's the double tragedy in this. And I'm hoping that we're starting to see some research happen in that vein. But certainly you could, the person that asked that question could certainly talk to some of the occupational hygienists at OCal who've been looking into this. So I've been trying to answer most of the other questions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
somebody asked, I also heard of EDTA being given to the workers exposed to silica to prevent silicosis. Don't know if that left any side effects. I don't know what EDTA is. If somebody has an answer to that.
Completely inappropriate.
Yeah.
EDTA is a treatment for chelating metals. It's completely inappropriate for something like silicosis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then just some comments, when we're talking about the unions and stuff with respect to the Denison Mine wildcat strike that happened in April of 1974, where they protested the health and safety conditions. And because of that, we have an occupational health and safety act in Ontario. And I spoke about that I think we spoke about that in our first article as well that we wrote. So I really encourage people to read those articles. Please share them with people. The people who are, I know that there was a lot of people who weren't able to attend today, but who signed up because they wanted the recorded version of this. It would be a good legacy for my dad and for the other workers that you're listening to here to watch that video with your loved ones, with miners who are in the mines today, young guys, old guys. Listen to your grandparents who went through this and talk about it and ask them, because I know when the Fifth Estate did their episode in 2016 on the McIntyre Powder Project miners, I heard from people all over, and the Toronto Star did some work, and CBC radio and the local newspapers and stuff. I started to hear from people saying, oh my God, I asked my dad this. He was in mining for 50 years. I knew nothing about this. And it's just very typical for mine workers to just be very stoic, put up with your working conditions. There's a real culture there. But they will stand up for each other, and they stood up for my dad, and they stood up for each other. And even I know Roger, when I was asking him to do this, he said there are so many of these guys that are dead. And their widows lost houses, they lost everything because they weren't compensated. And I need to be here standing up. And you'll see that a lot of them they worry about the next guy, well, I'm not too bad, and they're dragging oxygen tanks. I'm not so bad, but this guy over here, we got to help him, and that's the way that they are. And that's why I love them.
Yeah. Thank you, Janice. That is a perfect ending. Thank you everybody who attended this webinar and, was able to just listen to these guys' story share. Thank you to Alan, to Jill, to John, to Hugh, Jim, Roger, T, and of course, especially to Janice for just sharing your time, sharing your stories, being really vulnerable. I feel so grateful to have met all of you. And, I really feel hopeful that this will be a part of a legacy of fighting toward justice for you and for everybody who, wasn't able to make it out today either. Wasn't able to make it out. Janice?
Sorry, I
Thank you
just have
very much.
one last quick thing. I really want to thank the Journal for New Solutions for printing these stories, for encouraging these stories, for having a place to house these kinds of stories, because I was carrying a huge burden of, because of confidentiality. I can't talk about that I spoke to Jill Major last week and helped him with a compensation claim or whatever. I can't do that, but they can certainly do that. And you lifted a huge burden off of me, because I felt like I was the guardian and the carrier of these stories, and I was able to put that on paper and have an open access and have it live forever, where people can access it long after I'm dead and gone, and long after all of my miners are dead and gone. So I appreciate it from my soul. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Janice. And yeah, thank you also for uplifting New Solutions. You took the words right out of my mouth, but you know, the stories that these folks are sharing are one of many, many stories of different workers and different community groups that are in the pages of New Solutions. I encourage all of you, if you got this link through the Eventbrite, which you should have, you can go to the New Solutions website and, you know, either read some of them or most importantly, submit some of your own stories for workers that you know who, you know, we want to uplift and share out, because amplification is a critical component of United Front organizing. And so, Darius?
Thank you, Swati. You basically said everything I was going to.
Excellent. But yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Corey, for your excellent captioning. Yeah, and I appreciate all of you. And for folks who registered, I will be sending the recording, an edited version of the recording, to all of you. We will also be posting it online, so you have access to it, irrespective of whether or not you registered. And yeah, I hope you're all well. And thanks for hanging in with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
everybody.